Okay, when you started your podcast, were there other podcasts with the same topic, or were you kind of blazing a new trail? Like, what was the scene like?
Yeah, so there's only a few. I think there was probably like 8 or 10, and there's still not that many. I mean, it's not like competing on YouTube or anything like that. One big thing that I did was I put like my exam is IELTS, so I put IELTS in the title. So anyone that was like, let me find a podcast related to IELTS, I was super easy to find, basically.
Okay, and you just dropped a big tip right there. And
Yeah.
this is the tip that you gave me as well in our podcast strategy session was naming your podcast. Like, go ahead and tell everyone your tip here. So you use the phrase that people are searching, the test they need to take, which is an acronym very specific to your audience, and that is in your podcast title.
Yeah. So what I would do is think about when you're naming your podcast, I would think about what are people are going to search for. So like if I were to look up, marketing or virtual assistants, like that's what I'm going to look for, right? So you want to do a little bit of research. If you don't know what those keywords are, find out what people are searching for. Maybe do like an interview with potential clients and kind of see like what language they would use to look for. And I would try to highlight and get one of those keywords in your title, if not then in a tagline, because that's going to make you more searchable, even if you don't have any downloads and Apple is not promoting you.
Yeah, that is so good. And this is the tip we do for Pinterest boards. Like so many clients, when we first start with them, will have like the cutesy titles for their Pinterest boards. And it's all about SEO. It's all about using the exact words and the exact phrases people are searching and putting that as your board title. And you're saying the same thing as with podcasts, which I see lots of cutesy podcast titles. And that works well for people who have a big name. But if you look at some of the most basic podcasts, not basic, some of the top, like in my world, online marketing podcasts, they all have that. They all have that in their title in one form or another. So
Yeah.
I went from not wanting a podcast to like, bam, in 4 weeks, like launched one. Thank God for my team and my podcast editor. But I saw when I was pitching some of my clients that summer the power of having that in my network. And I was already creating this content inside my Facebook group. And I knew that I could serve more people if more people could listen and find it. And so I had to get over myself for a little bit, but I was like the rare, like anti-establishment, podcaster there. But it's changed my business. It's helped so much, and it helps me work through my messaging. It's helped with offers, like people getting into my funnel. And then it's helped me get on other podcasts and increase my visibility. And the number one thing, which you said earlier, was like position myself as an authority in this industry, in this realm. And a podcast really says that. So if you're somebody or you have a client, this is like kind of thinking about it, like Kristin and I are encouraging you to go for it for sure. And it's okay if it's messy a little bit at the beginning. Like you have time. You have time. And the purpose of this interview is to help you once you start getting that going and get over that hump. Kristin and I have talked about how important it is to promote it afterward. I feel like there's a big hump at the beginning to just get started. But in order to avoid the pod fade, your podcast from fading into oblivion, you have to like keep nurturing it. And this is a lot of work. So I would love to know your best tips when it comes to getting more downloads, getting more listeners, and all of that.
So I'll start by telling you a story. Okay. So when I started, I didn't know if I was doing well or not, because there was like no measuring stick, really. It turns out I was doing pretty good to start, but I had no idea until I went to a podcast conference, and there, Libsyn was there and they were speaking. So Rob from Libsyn was speaking, and he gave kind of like the measuring stick. So he said, like, if you're at, I think it was like the average is below like 800 downloads per episode, like 50% of all podcasts are under 800. If you're like at 800 and between 800 and, I think it's 1100, you're above that 50%. At 1100, you're in the top 20%. At 3000, you're in the top 10%. At 5000, you're in the top 1%. And what this did was give me a measuring stick that gave me like the energy, the momentum to go for it. And without that measuring stick, I would have just been like, are people really listening? I don't know if I'm really seeing results. So at that point, I was like, okay, let me start trying to grow it and try to do different things. And around the same time, I was also like, let me, I wanted to take my first break, and we went on a trip somewhere. And I was like, well, I want to keep growing the podcast without doing it. So I started experimenting with audiograms, which is also something I'd kind of heard about at the podcast conference. So with the audiogram, if you don't know what it is, you just take like a 59-second bit of your podcast. Don't go over 60 because then Instagram won't accept it. So do 59 seconds, make just a little graphic, and I would say make it simple in case you want to turn it into an ad later. And then you use Headliner for free, and you can make like an audio, like a visual audio thing, and post it as a Facebook post, which you can later turn into an ad or even boost it, which most people don't boost, but that's what I did. So I made a bunch of audiograms from kind of my best episodes. I made like 5 or 6 of them. Then I didn't target an audience or anything because I was just starting. And all I did was like boost the ads. And then I turned them into ads. I boosted the posts. And then I also shared them with like I spammed a bunch of groups with it, which allowed spamming. And in the time that I took a break, I actually doubled my downloads. So I was getting like 200 downloads a day before. And then after I was getting 400 downloads a day only through boosting audiograms. And I spent like $15 a week, maybe for like 5 weeks. I didn't do anything crazy.
When you were boosting it, did you boost to your current Facebook audience, or were you doing like friends of friends? Do you remember what you did?
Yeah, I think I just boosted to the Facebook audience because at that time it was also really easy to get followers. Like I had like 15,000 followers like that. And that's not happening now. So that algorithm was different then. So I boosted to them, but I also shared to all the IELTS groups and I just spammed them, which not all groups let you do that, but I did it. And at the same time, it was giving free content. And now if I do that, it's a little bit more sophisticated. I'll create like a Facebook ad with a targeted audience, and you could run it, if you want to spend some money, you could run $5 a day. You could run it a couple times a week. Or a couple times a month, just whatever your budget is. I would never spend that much on it, but you could spend as much or as little as you want. And I do see results because it's driving people directly back to your podcast, and it's an engaging type of ad.
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people discount that Facebook ads for podcasts. But if you went to Amy Porterfield's Facebook page right now and looked at the ads she's running, a good chunk of them are to her podcast, because that is generating leads for her. It's probably her best content, or it might be some of the most recent as well. But each of those podcasts has an opportunity for some kind of content upgrade. Like she's collecting emails through there. She's collecting through the pixel, right? So she can retarget those people. So it's like working for you. It's just not the typical lead we see where you're like, put in your email right now and get this thing. So I have been meaning to do this for my own business, and I have not since we talked. So I'm glad you're reminding me of this, because I know that it's a quick way to get in front of the right audience. And I don't know, it makes so much sense when you're looking to like get those downloads fast. What else do you have for us when it comes to promoting?
One thing that I want to talk about, we talked a little bit about SEO, but I think that this is a lesson that I learned, was like SEO is actually really important beyond the podcast, because unless you're creating podcast titles which are like SEO optimized, which I don't necessarily recommend, I create titles which are based on surveys from students. So I'll create titles based on their struggles and their pain points, and those are not SEO optimized. And also like, they're more like email headline click type ones. It's not like I did a bunch of research and then wrote like one based on SEO. So there's really a gap between your titles and SEO, and it's not going to show up in Google unless you do something else. So I would say you don't have to do this right now. It's a gradual process. So as you get more into the process of, really being a podcaster and really growing it, then I would say consider doing a blog. And I would say the blog is not going to be the same thing as your podcast. So don't repurpose it. A lot of people think like, oh, I can just repurpose, but it's not going to meet those SEO requirements. So I would say do just a little bit of research on what SEO means and how to make like an epic blog post. And I would say identify the themes that you're talking about. So in my podcast, I talk about vocabulary, writing, and speaking. And to be honest, I'm just starting with this as well. Have not devoted the time to it that I need to, and that's okay. I'm just doing what I can do. But I've done the speaking part, and you should see the amount of organic traffic now that I have coming to my website to the speaking. And then in the speaking epic blog post, I embed all my podcast episodes. So I'm basically backlinking to myself, which is really important for SEO. Yes. And it's also driving people back to the podcast. So everything that you do, you need to always be driving back to the podcast. I think a lot of people will drive like, oh, I've got my Facebook Live, or I did a YouTube, or I have an Instagram page. If you want to be a podcaster and you want to grow it, you've got to have everything circle back into that funnel. Because like we said with Amy, that's probably the top of her funnel, and that's how it should function. So you want to always be driving people back. If they find you on Google and they look at your article, you want them that just to be kind of like the tip of the iceberg, and for them to learn more by getting into your podcast, learning how amazing you are, everything that you have to say, how much they want to work with you. And then again, they can click on your freebie, your masterclass, whatever you're selling inside of your podcast as well. So you have to remember it's a cycle, and you have to keep driving back into that circle.
Oh, this is so good. So I am actually really good about this. I 100% believe in blogs. I've seen it work for my clients. I started my blog, I think we're getting close to 2 years now, but I am just now starting to see that return because SEO is a long-term game. So any opportunity to add a podcast, or like we're very aware of when a podcast comes out, like where would it fit in a past article, and updating that, which is good for SEO anyway. But yeah, that's so good to remember. Like it's like this constant wheel of content, and you've got to remind people about the podcast. And what you're saying is like, it doesn't have to be a blog based 100% on that podcast, but the podcast can be attached to it or relevant in some form or fashion, right? Is that what you're saying? Are you saying do a blog solely about that episode?
Yeah, no, I would say don't do a podcast for every episode. I would say, a blog for every podcast episode. I would say identify the themes that you talk about in your podcast, and then do like one big blog post for each of those themes. So if my blog post is IELTS speaking, if that's one of my themes, what I will then do is a little bit of SEO research, make a SEO optimized title, and then I will make an amazing blog post, very super long, and I'll have like, okay, pronunciation, and then I'll link to my pronunciation episodes, and then maybe grammar for speaking, and then I'll link to those episodes. And then at the end, I'll just link to every single one of my speaking episodes. And in the middle, I may also take like, the podcast player embed code and put that in there, so it kind of looks cool, like a cool, not just a link, but a cool like listen here. Yeah. And then also drive to maybe do like a funnel to like a low ticket offer that you have or something like that inside of there. So you can kind of create that as your funnel, and you're giving free stuff away that's showing your knowledge, but you're also starting to embed other little funnels there. So yeah, that's what I would do. And I get a lot of hits per day. It's all coming there. So you'll see that it's showing up, and that showed up like number 3 on Google. And so just a little bit of research, and then making sure it's not those exact titles, because those titles are probably not SEO optimized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I really see this when I'm doing content marketing. It's kind of a cross between having like your cornerstone content, but also like a landing page to like send people to the right next step. So I like what you're saying. And this is not something I'm doing, although we have it on like the, long-term plan. I get through it one day.